Okay, good afternoon. I've got my presentation here set up, ready to go. I've got the teacher side over here and the student side over here. This presentation is designed to be used at our first back-to-school department meeting that will happen in August, and really thinking about using this specifically with teachers. So even though this is teacher mode and student mode, you can imagine that my audience is an audience of high school or middle school language arts teachers, and that I, as the teacher, I'm actually the supervisor talking about some of these approaches here. So hello everyone, and welcome back to an exciting new school year. We are of course very eager and excited to start our 23-24 school year, and of course we're opening up with a classic line from Conjunction Junction, "What's your function?" I know all my language arts teachers love Schoolhouse Rock. Unfortunately today we are not talking about parts of speech, but we are talking a lot about function, purpose, right? What something actually does. We're going to try and use that active language today as we really think about our multimedia and the way in which we're using multimedia in our classes this year. So hopefully you can follow along with me on PearDeck. There are some questions and some tools here that I think will be helpful, not just because we're talking about this topic, but also even the way it's presented here hopefully gives you some good common examples for us to talk about together as a department. So let's start off with a question here. Learning is what's going to help us to define our purpose. So here's what we need to consider. What are our students? You've got 4 different options here, so go ahead and make a choice on the right. Would our students be sponges, buckets, webs, or fires? So if we take a look at those responses, I'll see everybody. Right now we only see mine, but hopefully we're seeing a lot more of those responses that fall under that web and fire. Yes, we often think of our students as sponges who absorb information, absorb learning, all those types of things. But in fact, we actually see that there are some downsides to this perspective, right? Both the sponge and the bucket kind of model. The biggest downside, of course, is that this model of learning about information acquisition that suggests that we as teachers and educators are just meant to deliver content to kind of fill up our students is, in addition to being a little bit underwhelming in terms of professional craft and pedagogy, it's also just not accurate. This is not how learning works, and we have, through research, learned to understand that students do not just learn more by getting more content or more information, but in fact, our understanding of cognitive processes really puts us more into this knowledge construction idea in which we are using research methods that are helping to support a far transfer, meaning that students aren't just remembering this for one lesson or one activity or one unit, but that they're able to transcend and apply these skills in different units, in different classes, and ideally even in different years of their actual education. So this cognitive model of thinking involves us understanding how the brain processes information as it comes to us. Again, not all falling into one big giant bucket, but instead rather through the connections that students are able to make, that learners are able to make through new content that is purposefully delivered to them. So let's start first with that purposeful idea. If our goal as a department is to improve student learning through the deliberate application of some of these multimedia principles, we need to think about some of the domains in which we are currently using multimedia. Film is one that almost every single one of our classes is using in some capacity. We also, of course, see that things like Google Slides and audiobooks are also different tools or different media that allow us to kind of integrate both the spoken and the written, right, the visual and the auditory, in terms of those different media that students are exposed to. So let's start first with just a question that, again, will hopefully open up some discussion here in our department meeting today. I'd like you please to select a medium that you have used before and to just start off with what are those good ideas and bad ideas that you have observed when integrating multimedia. So again, go ahead and on that student side, open up that PearDeck and respond. This could give us a nice little repository of teacher responses here. So I do not expect you to necessarily read from that tiny little thing, but a beautiful thing about PearDeck is that we can see all of those student responses here. So again, at this point in our actual department meeting, I'll present our slides, our different responses, and give teachers the opportunity to talk to each other. A little think, pair, share. Again, just thinking about the kind of the goods and the bads that we have seen so far from these different media. As we talk together as a class and as a department, hopefully we'll start to think about and get a sense of where we are feeling strong as a department, but also where we feel the need for growth. So the multimedia principle, which is one of the kind of guiding ideas that we understand about learning and cognitive processing, will help us to understand that essentially that words and graphics are much stronger than either words or graphics are on their own. And so we want to think about how we can utilize that principle when trying to instruct students and teach them about new and interesting, important things. So when we think about that multimedia principle, again, it's not just that we want to include those things, but we want to think about them in terms of function, right? And so even just thinking about the use of a visual, right, when added to text, we see that they are not necessarily all created equally. Would you please take a minute and drag the icons next to you and kind of use that galaxy brain meme, right? At the top of the meme, we see our kind of least impressive and least thoughtful form of student engagement, whereas down by the bottom, we've got our most thoughtful. So we're going to go ahead and take these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and go ahead and rank them here based on how we think that they should ultimately be used. Okay, if we take a look at our student answers, again, we can see all those different slides and where we're kind of ranking these things, right? We're definitely seeing that number 5, definitely not as valuable or as important, right? Whereas by the time we're getting to making intangible phenomena visible and concrete, well, that seems something that's really important. Again, the visual allows us to start to do this. Here we have text, and we could have already ranked these things, but having the actual visual of the galaxy brain forces us to start to make some decisions, right? To actually recognize the scale that we have here. Again, we are combining the spoken, or the written word in this case, with the visual to help increase engagement and increase those cognitive processes and connections that students are able to make. So when we think about this multimedia principle, we now want to think about how are we going to actually use this to engage student learners. So again, I'll ask you at this point to either come back to the example you used before with your group members or something totally fresh. How can this idea of using multiple media together help to engage student learners? Again, teachers can answer here. We'll show those responses and have, again, another think, pair, share type discussion. But we also need to remember that this is really a question of balance, right? When we are talking about how to do these things effectively, we want to make sure that we really have a clear sense of what is that purpose. How do we know whether a picture is too much or not enough? We want to make sure that we are balancing those different applications of media, right? We do not want to overload all of our senses at once. We instead want to think about what is the purpose of this lesson? What is the purpose of this particular piece of media? Or what is the purpose of this text, right? Again, all of those kind of helping us to make those decisions about what is actually relevant. Because if we're not sure about what's relevant, then we are at risk of violating the coherence principle. Again, another one of those ideas that is supported by research about how cognitive learning is actually happening. So when we take a look at the coherence principle, we are looking to avoid extra words, extra graphics, and extra audio. Of course, what is extra is really defined by that lesson's purpose. If we are, for example, in our film class and looking at cuts and transitions between different types of scenes in editing, well, we might need every single one of those graphics. So supporting the coherence principle might be more about kind of creating more space than it is about eliminating the graphics entirely. Again, the point of extra meaning that it is extraneous and providing extra strain, extra undue pressure on the brain to try and make those connections and hold onto thinking and learning. So when we are making choices about our applications of multimedia this year, we really need to think about what is extra, which of course comes back to conjunction junction and what is our function in the first place, right? What are we really trying to do with our class, with our lesson, with our material that we've brought into class? So let's take a minute as learners and leaders here and do a little bit of reflecting. So where have you seen these violations here of the coherence principle, right? We have distraction, we have disruption, we have seduction. All are 3 different ways in which a learner may be distracted by what's actually happening, where a multimedia choice is not supporting the learning, but is in fact a distraction. Violation of that coherence. So let's take a minute, answer right here, and then we'll open this up to classroom conversation, and again, hopefully building our sense of best practices together as a department. So remember, when we are making these decisions together, either in your teams or just in your individual class, we want to root that purpose, right? The actual function of that media, especially that combined media, the multimedia, in our cognitive theory of actual learning, right? Thinking about the connections that students are making, thinking about the way in which we are activating prior knowledge as opposed to just kind of filling a bucket with new content that may or may not ever be actually transferable to their learning. So my reflection questions for you are, what are you growing toward, right? In terms of your own growth and in terms of your own development as a learner and as a teacher, what is it that you see yourself moving towards? And where do you anticipate needing some more of that support? Again, that gives me a chance to help and support that work that you are doing over the course of the year.